Hello and welcome to Strip Panel Naked. I'm Hass and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best and most interesting comics. You know, I've been recommended a lot of comics since starting this channel, but one thing that has come up very frequently has been Korean webcomics. So I took a look on Webtoons to see how this adapts the medium, and there was a couple of interesting things about the format. The main idea here is that these comics are on what I would call an infinite canvas, and they scroll. So they're thin, but they're long, and they're designed primarily for mobile use. I've spoken about something similar before with Ibrahim Mustafa's Jaeger, and you can watch the episode by clicking the little card thingy on the top right here, but these Korean webcomics work slightly differently than what Ibrahim Mustafa was doing there. And the big difference is the page. You know, in all print comics, a lot of webcomics, and even the Comixology Guided View exclusive comics were given essentially a page. It's got a top, a bottom, a left and a right side, and that becomes your canvas to tell a story. With the Korean webcomics, while that is fundamentally the same, you just don't know where the end is, and the length of the page is given as much space as necessary, revealing itself only as you scroll down. And this makes a whole host of different tools available to creators, and more than I can really talk about in one of these videos, so this is something I'll probably circle back around for in a few more parts in the future. Instead for today, I want to talk about how it affects showing movement and pacing in the comic page. I'll use a couple of examples, and the first one is from a comic called Windbreaker, and it follows this chap here, Jay, who's this extreme biker, and there's two moments here to talk about, and both of them do essentially the same thing, they work in exactly the same way, but it shows the possibilities of the infinite canvas form and what it can do with movement. So both instances are Jay riding down the page, essentially. We begin by seeing some kind of link to him, you know, here it's the line his bike causes through the page, or it's the beginning of his shout as he goes downhill. And essentially the form allows for a constant series of page turns, in hiding the reveal from the audience as they scroll down. And by hiding the actual image of Jay on the bike, we're scrolling to reveal information. You could present this page as it might be seen in a more traditional comic on a full page splash. And if you do that, you end up receiving the information in just one big hit. You can delve in and explore, but that works as one individual image, much in the same way as I discussed with Steranko's splash pages last time. And it does work, you know, it's still effective, but it just reads differently, because you're getting it all in one go. Let's compare that to seeing the image scroll through on the infinite canvas model as you would on Webtoons. Two major differences, right? And I mentioned the first is you don't see what's happening until the end, so you're processing as you go. But importantly, it also extends the length of time it takes you to read that image. It's not about necessarily reading the comic, but reading the image that you're being given, which I think is the main advantage of this format overall. Whereas it takes a fraction of a second to get in your brain as a splash, you turn the page and you've got an image of what that is already immediately. Here you're being drip fed the information. Even if you scroll through this quickly, you're still seeing parts of the image at a time, and you're building it up in your mind as you go, piece by piece by piece. And because of this, it starts to read like we're trying to catch up with Jay, we're chasing him down the page in both instances. It's added an element of interactivity and a physical sense of movement as we scroll to find him riding away from us. And that invites the idea of time into the comic in a much more specific way. I've spoken about time signatures in comics compared to film before, and how the two differ when it comes to conveying that passing of time. And here these webcomics are essentially emulating the way that film deals with pacing, by forcing a very specific flow and timing to the actions playing out by its use of extended lengths or spacing. Let's take this example from Sweet Home episode 1. A security guard is telling this kid that he gets treated like shit, and then realizes the mistake he's made, I guess by saying that word, and tries to change topic. I've presented this to you first, as you might see in a normal comic page. Still works, right? You know, you still see the beat on the oops, the moving to the next image, it's fine, it works. If I present it to you as it's done originally in the webcomic, you can see that there's a specific amount of black being left between panel 1 and 2, and panel 2 and 3. And there's this sort of pause built in where the guard realizes what he said. It's emulating the ellipses placed in that balloon there, but in physical space, which is what webcomics have over print. With print, physical space obviously costs you money. With webcomics, it doesn't. You'll also notice though how the margins of the page suddenly stretch out to condense the panel width right down, before opening up a little bit more for that third panel. So you're able to play with perceptions in much the same way as a page turn, because that's effectively just what you're doing. Each of these moments functions as their own page, like a comic that just exists with one panel per page. However, the biggest difference comes from that scroll, and that's what sets it apart from the stuff like the Comixology native guided view comics. And that's where the magic lies, because by scrolling we are passing time physically. We feel the time of the guard realizing what he said, of Jay cycling down the hill, because we're being asked to live it as we scroll. Like with the Tradmore episodes of the show, where Trad talked about dropping panel gutters to show everything colliding into each other and have time go quicker, and the David Aha episodes on negative space that show time passing with a blank bit of white on the page, gutters can reveal a lot about passing time between images. Here in these Korean webcomics, they're taking that to another level by forcing the gutters to become actual physical time passing. While this is, of course specific to these infinite scrolling webcomics, the theory behind it is pulled straight out of a traditional page-based comic. The language is translatable, and the effect is understood easy enough for anyone diving into these for the first time. What Korean webcomics do is no different, but they've adapted it to a new version of the medium that gives them more control of time and space in lieu of design and aesthetic. In that compromise though, is some really interesting approaches to reader relationship and pacing. And all the webcomics that I've had chance to read all use that to interesting effect to control the way that you're reading the comic and hitting the narrative beats. Thanks for watching. If you're a fan of Strip Panel Naked, you can support the show via Patreon, where your pledge gets you access to tons and tons of extra content every single week. You can get my magazine at panelxpanel.com and find me on Twitter at HassanOE. Finally hit subscribe and that notification button to keep up to date with all the latest episodes, and I will see you next time.